Hey, welcome to Pro Football Now. We are previewing Week 2 and kicking off this show like we do every show, emptying the reporter's notebook with our very own Jenny Vrentas, Albert Breer here from the MMQB.com. Let's start with the biggest injury news. Unfortunately, Albert, this is David Johnson. He's out for 2 to 3 months, as we're hearing, with a left wrist injury. He'll have surgery. What does this do to the Cardinals locker room? How do they overcome a loss like this?
I don't know if it'll have so much of an effect in the locker room as it will the identity of the team. And a big part of what they were doing going into this year, if you look at where the talent is and has been over the last few years, it has been on the offensive side. And guys like John Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, Carson Palmer, they were a high-scoring offense when Bruce Arians first got there. He basically rejuvenated Carson Palmer's career. They knew that they were going to have to start to change the identity of the team with Palmer and Fitzgerald getting older. And a lot of it was going to be based on improvement on defense and getting better with guys like Chandler Jones and Marcus Golden and Patrick Peterson and Tyrann Mathieu. They've got talent on that side of the ball. And part of that overhaul and their personality was building around David Johnson. And you take David Johnson out of the mix now, can they really build around Andre Ellington and Chris Johnson coming in? I mean, it's just, it throws everything that they built the team to be off a little bit.
Yeah, just like the expectations for the season. I mean, you have 3 people there when Bruce Arians, Carson Palmer, and Larry Fitzgerald, who are nearing retirement age, right? You don't know exactly how much longer they'll be in Arizona. So David Johnson was a piece of trying to win this year. 2 years ago, they were very good. Last year, they took a huge step back. But could they be good again this year? I thought they would have a chance with David Johnson in the lineup. But now that he's out for 2 to 3 months, it's hard to imagine them having that same kind of identity on offense they wanted.
And I think the idea is really, Maggie, you find a way to tread water, and then you hope he gets back quick. You hope that at some point in November, and I know this is what they're hoping, that they can pull him off of IR, and maybe at that point they're 5-4 or they're 6-5, and they're in a position to still compete for a wild card spot. Now, I think most people would assume that Seattle will be running away with the division by then, but the Rams, the Niners, we don't know where they're going to be at. You certainly could see a scenario where they could be able to tread water and then be in a position where David Johnson comes in as an addition late in the year and they get hot.
Designated for IR, could return, I guess earliest would be week 9.
Right.
Let's talk about Carson Palmer, 38 years old, against the Lions, throws 3 interceptions, did not look good, but then again, neither did the entire team. Jenny, is this a team that's going to need to be looking at this 2018 quarterback class that we expect to be very stacked and looking for the answer in the future?
Yeah, absolutely, because this could be Palmer's last year. This could be Bruce Arians' last year in Arizona. So then you kind of start a rebuild and you go in a new direction with the new quarterback. I mean, we saw Palmer. He looked his age. I mean, as Albert said, Bruce Arians really revived his career in Arizona, and he was exceptional 2 years ago. But week 1, it looked like he did kind of toward the end of last year.
It's a team that's built to win now. I mean, and it has been a team that's built to win now. And, they've seriously looked at the idea of bringing in a quarterback. My understanding is in 2014, if Blake Bortles had fallen to him, and now it sounds crazy because they were picking 20th and the Jaguars were picking 3rd, but the possibility at the time seemed real. If he had fallen to them, their plan was to take him and to develop him behind Carson Palmer. Another player they supposedly liked was Patrick Mahomes. Now, who knows whether or not they would have taken him over Hassan Reddick had Holmes been available to them with the 13th pick. But it's not like it's something they haven't looked at. They've looked at the idea of it. It's just the right player hasn't fallen to them at the right time. And now they're in a position where if Carson Palmer is what he looked like he might be here in week 1, we could be talking about them being in a very, very difficult position where they may have to force a quarterback signing or a quarterback draft pick in 2018.
Very interesting. I think we've talked about the Cardinals enough. Let's move on, though. We should talk about Jared Goff. Now, it could be a little difficult to assess where Goff is really because they were playing the Indianapolis Colts in week 1, and they are possibly the worst team in the NFL. But what are other teams, what are the Rams thinking about Goff, Albert, as he starts year 2 as just 1 year removed from being the number 1 overall pick?
It seems like we have a lot of contenders for worst team in the NFL.
Yeah, I know. It's a close race with the Jets and a couple others.
Yeah, look, I think the big thing here is look at the coaching. And I think that what we've seen underscores the importance of a guy's head coach, his offensive coordinator, his offensive line. You know, Jared Goff was in a messy situation last year during Jeff Fisher's last year as the Rams coach. He had a first-year offensive coordinator who had no play calling experience. The run game was a mess, certainly wasn't what it was in Todd Gurley's first year in 2015. They've gotten a lot of those things right now. And you bring in a guy like Sean McVay to be the head coach. Look what Sean McVay did for Kirk Cousins. Look how perception of Kirk Cousins changed from 2012, 2013, 2014 to 2015, 2016. What McVay was able to do with Kirk Cousins is what he's doing now with Jared Goff in Los Angeles. It's identify what he's good at and put him in a position to do those things and then build from there. And so we don't have full answers on where Jared Goff's going to be down the line, but we see a base of what he's good at, and that's what they have him doing. And then you build from there and you see if he can grow past it.
And just putting him in the best position to succeed, whether it be play calling and scheme, but also the players around him. I mean, they invested in the offensive line. They made the trade for Sammy Watkins, to add skill position players. So basically giving him a better environment that he had last year all around. I mean, he looked like the most improved player, I mean, at least after week one. I think you saw McVay pulling from, like Albert said, things he's comfortable with, things from college. I mean, a lot of coaches go back to what did you do well then? Let's mix in those concepts, and I think we saw a lot of that week one.
You certainly see why he was the #1 overall pick. With some of the throw to Cup. I mean, there were certain plays he made where it was just, I don't feel like we saw a lot of it last year. And there were 3, 4, 5 plays in there. And again, the touchdown to Cup was certainly one of them where you see him drop back, you see the quick release, you see the way the ball comes off his hands, like, wow. Like, okay, that's why he was the #1 overall pick.
Yeah, 21 for 29, over 300 yards passing with a touchdown, no interceptions. Looked like a completely different quarterback than what we saw in his rookie year. Meanwhile, a veteran, a former league MVP, Cam Newton. Yes, Carolina got the win by 20 points over the 49ers, but Cam did not look 100% healthy, Jenny, coming off of the shoulder injury. Do you think that he's still feeling these lingering effects from that surgery?
Well, going into the season, he'd thrown 2 throws in the preseason, right? He hadn't fully aired out the ball. We knew that he was icing his shoulder in training camp, so it was something that was still lingering. And so, you know, they made a commitment to putting him out there week one. But, you know, listen, shoulder surgery for a quarterback is not insignificant. And it's fair to assume that, you know, he's still feeling some of these effects. If as recently as a few weeks ago, they weren't comfortable having him throw more in the preseason, and he was still icing the shoulder. Now, once you're in the grind of the season, where do you go from here? Because you're working that shoulder hard every Sunday, and it's hard to imagine it getting a lot better after week one. So they have to hope that he's in a place where he can make it through the rest of the year.
And I'll tell you what, like that staff was nervous. They won't say so, but that staff was nervous going into week one. They didn't know exactly what they were going to get from Cam Newton because, like you said, he only threw 2 passes in the preseason. You can only simulate so much in practice. So they wanted to see what he looks like when he's making consecutive throws, when he's got to play to tempo, when they go into 2-minute, when he's got to throw off a platform. There were all these things that they had to look for in game. And coming out of the game, there were certain circumstances where he wasn't perfect. Like he was late a couple times, he missed a couple throws. They believe that the thing he's got to build up right now is the mental part of it. He's just got to trust it now. You know, they saw a lot of good things. For the most part, it was good for a first game back from a major shoulder surgery. Now he's just got to trust that he can do it all the time. And it's similar to when a guy comes back off of an ACL. You know, it's just remembering what you're able to do with it. And Cam's in that process, and obviously a very, very big first step playing that first game. Now you see how he progresses from there.
And of course, it's going to look like an easy W against the Bills this weekend, but don't forget they're playing their former defensive coordinator in Sean McDermott, who's now the head coach in Buffalo. One thing that we all know, it's become a cliche, is that success starts up front. Yet we've seen some offensive lines from teams that we projected to make the playoffs, like the Texans and the Giants and like Seattle and like Cincinnati. And these offensive lines, Jenny, they were just subpar. First of all, why? And secondly, which team is this going to hurt the most?
I think it's something that we're seeing more and more as the years go by. These players are coming out of these college spread offenses. They're often not even asked to put their hand in the dirt, or they might not have to finish a block because they're in an up-tempo situation and they're just moving from play to play really quickly. So they come in not as ready. So teams have had to adjust how they evaluate linemen coming out of college. Also, the practice rules have been a big issue. Less padded practices, less opportunity for backup young linemen to get, full contact reps. So I think the scouting and the development of players is totally different now, and teams have adjusted to differing degrees. I think the two teams that really stand out were the Giants and the Seahawks because they've got Super Bowl winning quarterback, excellent defenses, they have skill position players, and they just couldn't even score a touchdown week one, and the line was breaking down. I mean, you saw that Dallas Cowboys front is not an excellent front, and I mean, now I think that Rod Marinelli does a great job with the Cowboys defense, but they were making the pass rushers, DeMarcus Lawrence there look like Khalil Mack, right? So, and I think Seattle, you saw, really a huge play of the game turned when Russell Wilson strip sack. So I think those are the two teams that stand out. What can you do now to fix it the rest of the way if you want to be a contender?
I'll tell you what, and I'm going to get to this a little bit more in the last call, but they used to be a position where that's where you found the sure thing in the draft. I mean, you go back, like guys like Jonathan Ogden 20 years ago and Joe Thomas 10 years ago. There was nothing safer than drafting an offensive lineman in the top 5. You took a guy in the top 5, lock it up. That guy is going to be a 10-time Pro Bowler, and he's going to protect your quarterback's blind side for the next 15 years. And now you see Luke Jokel, and you see Greg Robinson. You see guys going high in the draft. Fisher's sort of worked out, but it took some time. You see it's not a sure thing anymore, and that's because guys coming out of college are projections. And like Jenny said, when they get to the pros, they're not hitting as much. And so it's something a lot of teams have to manage. And it's one thing that stuck out to me when I was making my training camp trip was how many teams, like if you looked at their season, it was contingent on questions on the offensive line being worked out. You mentioned the Giants and the Seahawks, the Colts, the Vikings, the Panthers, the Broncos, the Lions after Taylor Decker went down. There were so many teams, and it was glaring how many teams out there you looked at and you said, if the offensive line works out, then they could be really good. But there are some big ifs up there. And that's why I think you look at teams that have those positions taken care of, like the Cowboys and like the Raiders, and they're working from such a huge advantage to begin with in other teams.
Jenny Vrentas, Albert Breer, we're going to see you later on in the show, Albert. Jenny, thank you so much. And of course, now let's take a look at one of the most underrated pass rushers in the NFL. It's Brandon Graham, and it's our friends from Pro Football Focus who are breaking him down.
I'm Steve Palazzolo, this is Sam Monson, we are PFF, and this is Well Actually. Sam, Philadelphia Eagles defensive end Brandon Graham had a great game this past weekend. 2 sacks, 4 quarterback hurries, 4 total defensive stops. What many might call a breakout game for Brandon Graham. Well, actually, we're here to tell you that Brandon Graham has always been one of the better edge defenders in the entire league. Last year, number 2 overall, 93.9 grade as part of PFF Edge. You can find that he was number 2 right behind Khalil Mack of the Oakland Raiders. But Graham has never had more than 7 sacks in a season. How can a guy that doesn't get to the quarterback as often as these other 10 and 15 sack guys, how can he grade so high?
Yeah, and it's because there's more to life than sacks. Pressuring the quarterback is an art, and it's pressuring the quarterback, hurrying him, hitting him in the pocket. All these things are important, and sacks is just a small part of the puzzle. If you look beyond that, if you look at the pressure numbers, Brandon Graham pressures the quarterback as much as anybody. Last season, he had 83 total pressures, which was 3rd in the league, behind Khalil Mack again and behind Olivier Vernon. And why does that matter? It's because if you can just hurry the quarterback in the pocket, it makes a demonstrable difference on his passing ability. On average last year, it took his passer rating down from the mid-90s into the mid-60s. It was a 34-point drop, which is the equivalent of turning Tom Brady into Blake Bortles just by rushing him in the pocket.
Okay, that feels pretty significant, but at some point, the sack does matter. Now, Graham's only converted 7.2% of his pressures into sacks over the years. 15% is the average for most defensive ends. And we know what a sack is. A sack ends the drive. It ends the play. How can you possibly say, hey, the pressure is more important when you have a guy like Vic Beasley only had a 74.4 PFF grade? This is the argument we always get. Vic Beasley had 16 sacks, Graham had 6. Surely the sack must be more valuable.
Yeah, and it is. And most of the time, the sack is more important than the pressure. Sometimes the pressure is more important. It can result in an interception. You know, a guy gets hurried, he runs out of the pocket, he throws an ill-advised pass. It's a turnover for the defense. It's better than most sacks. But most of the time, the sack is more important. But the big question was how much more valuable? That was what we always tried to figure out. And we had the analytics guys at PFF run those numbers and come up with an EPA, an expected points added for these plays to work out exactly how much is the value. And they discovered that an average sack is worth 2.1 extra pressures, additional types of pressure. So for a guy like Vic Beasley, he's got 10 extra sacks on top of Brandon Graham. For Graham to match that, he would need 21 additional pressures of some kind. But he didn't get 21 more hurries than Vic Beasley last year. He had 38 extra pressures than Vic Beasley. So he was dramatically more valuable, even if you factor in the fact that the sacks are the more valuable play.
And when we're looking at sacks, we have to understand that not all sacks are created equal. And when you're truly evaluating a player and how well he's playing on a play, sometimes the sack is easier than the pressure. A lot of times we see a guy, create pressure that leads to a sack from his teammate. Vic Beasley, I think, was the beneficiary of a lot of that help last year. Brandon Graham, a guy that we've been talking about since he came into the NFL in 2010, was a part-time player until 2015, and I think last year, a career year for him in his first year as a starter, and off to a great start here in 2017.
Thanks a lot, guys. Now let's get into our Pro Football Now fantasy football market share. Last season, Chicago Bear rookie running back Jordan Howard was a breakout fantasy star, and his second campaign looked for those numbers to regress. Number one, he's plans to be going up against a lot of 8-man fronts this year. The Chicago Bears, one of the worst teams in the NFL. Now with the emergence of rookie running back Tariq Cohen, not only may his carries take a dip, but the main problem that Howard faces is his lack of production in the passing game. The Bears need weapons in the passing game. An option out of the backfield like Tariq Cohen almost renders Jordan Howard as just a plodding running back. Another player coming off a career year that's more than likely going to regress in 2017 is Cleveland Brown wide receiver Kenny Britt. Britt finally happened last season when he had a career season in Los Angeles with the Rams. This season in Cleveland, DeShone Kizer as the quarterback, don't expect the football to be in the air as much, not to mention Kizer has already developed a strong rapport with second-year wide receiver Corey Coleman. Don't expect another breakout campaign from Kenny Britt in 2017. Our Symetra rising star for week number 2 is Los Angeles Ram wide receiver Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp caught 4 passes in his first game, including a touchdown. Look for second-year quarterback Jared Goff, who is showing improvement under Sean McVay, to target Kupp in the red zone. Sammy Watkins will likely still be the team's #1 target, but Kupp runs what I like to call quarterback-friendly routes, and that's perfect for a young quarterback. Cooper Kupp is our Symetra rising star for week number 2.
Thanks, Corey. It's last call, and we're going to address all the complaining over the state of NFL quarterbacking right here, right now. And we're going to do it by taking you back to the Thursday night opener. Now, ask yourself this. Where would you rank Alex Smith among NFL quarterbacks? Maybe 15th, maybe 20th? Well, that guy just threw for 368 yards and 4 touchdowns and dealt Tom Brady his first AFC home loss since he was 29 and Gillette Stadium's field was grass. Now look it up. Find me a year where the depth of the position, and I'm talking about getting down to the 20th or 25th best guy, was better at quarterback than it is now. Or don't waste your time because you're not going to find it. You want to find the real problem in the NFL? Take your eyes off the ball. It's along the offensive line. Gone are the days of sure things like Joe Thomas and Jonathan Ogden at the top of the draft. Now, teams are stretching to find starters and scuffling to develop depth, a result of CBA rules limiting contact and the rise of the spread in college, which has made the translation to the pro level harder, both on the scouts and the players. Just think about it. The Giants, the Seahawks, Bengals, Colts, and Texans, among others, watched preseason line concerns morph into full-blown problems on Sunday. And all 4 teams that played on Monday, the Vikings, Saints, Broncos, and Chargers, have issues up front to manage. So focusing on Scott Tolzien, who's only filling in for Andrew Luck, or Tom Savage, who was, for a little while anyway, keeping the seat warm for Deshaun Watson, would be a little like picking a random PGA Tour event that Jordan Spieth is skipping and saying golf as a sport is in trouble. The point is, every team's not going to have a great quarterback, and times of transition can be ugly, which we already knew. Meanwhile, we just went through an offseason during which 5 offensive linemen with a total of 5 Pro Bowls and 1 All-Pro selection between them each scored contracts worth more than $11 million per year, and 0 offensive linemen won the first 15 picks for the first time in the 82-year history of the college draft. Given all of that, it's no wonder Texans Pro Bowler Dwayne Brown is still holding out for more money. There just isn't enough of him to go around, and he knows it. And the NFL knows that too. When Luck takes the reins from Tolzien and Watson settles in as Savage's replacement, the larger issue at hand will remain.